Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another challenge video. This time doing a video that I've been planning on doing for a while, and that is the top 10 challenge competitors of all time. Now I would be splitting this into two separate videos. This one will be about the top 10 male competitors, and then I'll obviously do female competitors following this. And straight up for the men, I mean, it's a lot easier to do a top 10 for the challenge, where I actually feel like that a lot of this top 10 kind of just like came together naturally. It wasn't even like that difficult to really parse through who should be where. With the women, it was a bit more difficult, but again, we'll get to that. Obviously, disclaimer, again, stats I'm going to be using here is everything up to challenge 40. I will not be including All Stars Rivals, which is currently airing at the time of this video coming out. So while, again, some of these people that we'll be talking about are people that we're technically seeing again, I'm actually recording this before the airing of that. So again, I'm not able to see what exactly happened. So again, All Stars Rivals will not be part of this assessment. Anyway, we'll be running through who I think are the top 10 competitors of all time, along with a decent chunk of honorable mentions. So with the honorable mentions here, again, I'll be starting off with people that, again, have never won the game. They've had some pretty decent records. I mean, Corey Wharton is obviously someone to mention here, someone that has a decent resume. Again, 11 seasons, 5 finals, obviously never won, but his elimination record's 11-5. Again, that's pretty impressive. I feel like Corey, somebody that if he's able to get a win under his belt, I think he'll be pretty close to the top 10, though obviously didn't make it here. Also considered Fessy, who is somebody that, again, I thought at a point had the potential to be an all-time great competitor. Again, has been on 5 seasons, gotten to the final 3 times. Again, a really great elimination record in 6-1, even the one that he lost was a bit of a finicky one at the end of Ride or Dies, where, again, Fessy has a very, very strong record. It's just, again, he hasn't had a win. And to be fair, even if he did, again, he'd probably be like teetering on the edge, but again, did not make it on the list. I do want to mention Leroy, just because, again, there's a long period of time where he was like considered like the best to never win, and he had an okay record. I mean, he's been on 14 seasons, 6 finals, a 10-6 elimination record. It's not entirely bad, and I do think, again, his more recent stint has been a bit of a negative for him, to where I feel like he just seems kind of out of it since he returned since Double Agents. But again, he's had some good runs here and there, but again, not enough to be top 10. And with I do also want to mention 2 people here that, again, I think they're careers are just very early on to really put them on the list, especially without a win, though I do want to mention the likes of Horacio and Kyland, who are 2 people who, again, I think have a lot of potential, and if they continue to compete, I do think they could eventually get amongst the best of the best, though as of right now, again, not particularly close just yet. And now for people that have won and still did not end up making the top 10, I did consider Abram. I mean, Abram, some of that, again, kind of icky nowadays, but had a pretty good record early on in the show, has won twice and made it to 4 final, won 49 dailies, though again, that doesn't really mean much considering like a lot of the early seasons had team daily wins, but still, I mean, Abram is someone that, again, a solid competitor for a time, did not make the top 10. Someone that was a bit closer to making the top 10, and one of the people that barely missed out on it was Alton, where Alton, someone that, again, at the time was one of the best competitors of all time, again, has been on 5 seasons, gotten to the final in 4 of them, won a season. The only one that he didn't get to a final in is one that he was clearly checked out during in Battle of the Seasons, and has a really insane elimination record. Again, a 6-1 record. Again, the only one he lost is, again, one that he was kind of checked out for, to where, and I think Alton is a very, very strong competitor. The problem is that, again, I think he's lost his gusto in his last couple appearances, and also his resume is not the biggest in the world, to where, again, I considered him for the top 10, though he barely missed out on the list. Also, someone that barely missed out on the list, the person that I believe was actually number 11 on my list, is Brad. And again, Brad is somebody that also, again, more recently, I think has had kind of lacking performances. But I mean, Brad, for the most part, though, is one of the most consistent competitors in the history of the show. I mean, while his overall record doesn't really scream out as anything overtly impressive, again, he's been on 14 seasons, 5 finals, only 1 win. And it's good, but again, not really to the point where it would necessarily match with the top 10 of this list, especially when, again, that's a very spotty elimination record of 8-9. Again, there are qualms there, but I do feel like Brad has, again, consistently been a pretty top competitor on most of the seasons he's been on. Again, back in the day, he made it deep on almost every single season. Even more recently, on the All-Star seasons, again, he's still having pretty good runs there, to where, again, I do feel like Brad is someone that is amongst the best of the best, but again, I feel like he just barely missed out on the top 10. Next up, also considered Frank Sweeney, obviously somebody that, again, had a very good run for the short period of time that he was there. Again, he had 3 seasons, 2 finals, 1 win, a 3-0 elimination record. Again, a very, very good track record there. Again, the only time that obviously he goes out before the final is a spot where, again, he was sick. So, again, Frank is somebody that I think had the potential to be amongst the best of the best. And obviously he's on All Stars Rivals now. And again, hopefully that ends up elevating his overall legacy. But as of right now, I do feel like it's tough to really squeeze him on the top 10 with such a small resume. Also, someone I want to consider here is Hunter, who, again, also has a very good record. Again, 4 seasons, 2 finals, 1 win. Again, a very solid track record there. But again, another one where, again, I think he just needed a little bit more for his resume to end up ultimately making the list. Same thing goes the next person here, and that is Jamie Murray, a person who has been on 3 seasons, went to the finals of 3 seasons, and also won 3 seasons, though has also never been to elimination. And again, it just makes it very tough to assess Jamie because, again, he has a spotless record. He's won 3 seasons, more seasons than most people ever win. Yet despite that, he also, again, never really faced much adversity and never had to play the kind of modern challenge game to where, and it's tough to really rank him, but again, I just did not feel right putting him in the top 10. And the same thing goes to the next person. That is Mike The Miz. And again, Mike's another person here. Decent record, again, 5 seasons, 4 finals, 2 wins, a 2-0 elimination record, but it's another one that, again, he hasn't competed since Inferno 2. That's literally season 10 of the show, and it's really tough to really gauge how he truly is as a competitor amongst the best of the best that have been on more seasons. So again, did not make the top 10. Also, I at least want to mention MJ, who is somebody that had a pretty decent record before he came back for All-Stars, where, again, he won a season. He performed admirably at points where, again, he was this last-second alternate multiple times. And he comes back on All-Stars and wins immediately when he comes back, and performs pretty admirably in All-Stars 3 despite the fact that he was still injured from the previous season. So again, I think MJ is a pretty solid competitor as well, though someone that, again, did not make the top 10. Same thing goes with Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is the person, again, I think recently has shown himself to be a pretty competent competitor. While his track record's not necessarily the greatest, especially in terms of, again, he's been on 8 seasons, only 3 finals, 1 win. That 1 win was, again, a very rocky one. Obviously, the one where Big Easy ends up almost dying. But again, he has a solid elimination record, 8-4. He has had a pretty solid run on recent seasons. Despite the fact that he had very few allies coming into the season, he had a pretty decent track record on Challenge 40. He obviously made the final in both All-Stars 2 and 3. And again, I think he's shown himself to be a very solid competitor, but one that, again, just could not make the top 10. Also going to mention somebody that, again, I think could have been on had they continuously competed, and that person is Vio Vaughn, who, again, also very good record on paper. Again, has been on 4 seasons, made the 3 finals, 2 wins. Again, only been in elimination once and lost that one. But again, that's kind of the thing is, again, not much to really work with. I mean, the only season that has a more standard modern format that he's been on is, again, Fresh Meat, where, again, he was a mid-boot there, where outside of that, he was a very solid, competent competitor, but just one that, again, there's not really much to praise outside of the old school era, and I feel like that's very tough to assess at this point. Also, you're going to consider Tyler, who had a very good record. I mean, at the time, again, he won 2 seasons back-to-back, won Cutthroat and Rivals, and I think that 2-season stretch there is, again, a very impressive stretch of gameplay from Tyler. The problem is, again, kind of the rest of his seasons are not particularly great. I mean, his more recent appearances have been very lacking. He also had some earlier boots early on as well, to where, again, it's kind of like a very inconsistent record there, to where while his peaks are very, very good, I think outside that, again, it's not quite enough to be in the top 10. Also, you're going to mention Yes, where Yes is somebody that, again, obviously never would have been contention until he returned for All-Stars, despite the fact that he actually technically won a season, even though it's Challenge 2000, but still, again, he comes back, very dominant performance in All-Stars 1, again, just blows everyone away in the final, and I think that's obviously very impressive there. But even then, after that, again, he's just kind of spotty, again, kind of like a mid-boot on All-Stars 3, doesn't really do much on World Championship, even though he does make it towards the end, where, again, Yes is just fine. Again, he's a very competent competitor, to where, I mean, he is probably in line with some of the, lower placed people on the top 10, but I think just his resume is not nearly as big, so again, left them off the top 10. And the last honorable mention here to mention is Zach. And Zach, again, had a pretty good record at a point. I mean, he obviously won his first ever season. He's made the 4 finals, won a good chunk of dailies. I mean, he won 33 dailies, which is pretty impressive considering the era of the show that he's from. But again, his elimination record's kind of spotty, 4-3. Again, he's had some pretty bad elimination losses within that. I think Zach is, again, a solid competitor. One that, again, if he continued to compete and he had solid runs there, again, he could potentially be in true contention for the top 10. Though, as of right now, again, he was more so hovering around the 15 to 20 slot. So again, he didn't make it on. But with that, again, we're now at the top 10, the top 10 male challenge competitors of all time. And at number 10, we're starting off with somebody that, again, for me, it was between this person and Brad. I just felt like this person had a better track record, and also I probably have more faith in this person. And that person is Derek Kosinski, where, again, Derek is somebody that obviously gets remembered as this really scrappy underdog figure, and he'll never give up. And I think the modern Derek is one that, again, I just have more faith in than the modern Brad. And to be fair, again, this is a more recent development. But again, this is at the time of like All-Stars 2 and 3. Obviously, Brad performed better than Derek at that point. But again, seeing from like Challenge 40, obviously Derek outperforms Brad. And when we're looking at their pure record, they've been on the same amount of seasons. But again, Derek's made it to one more final. He's won 2 more times than Brad. And he also has a better elimination record, where Brad has an 8-9. Derek has a 12-8. I feel like Derek nowadays just feels like, again, a slightly better version than Brad. To where, again, I would just have more faith in Derek in the modern day. And again, the stats kind of back that up. With, again, obviously Derek just being such a well-known, strong elimination competitor. And again, considering the fact that, again, he also got those 3 wins in what was, again, a very impressive stretch there of what seasons 14, 16, and 18. And beyond that, also had that very strong run on Gauntlet 2, where he won a whole bunch of eliminations. And the fact that he can still compete in the modern day, again, he is still a pretty competent competitor. I feel like all those things kind of wrap up to him being good enough to be here number 10. Now, number 9, again, essentially Derek, but a step better. Again, kind of similar style competitor, but that's still pretty competent nowadays, though, again, had obviously most of his success back in the day. And at number 9, I do have Darrell. And again, Darrell is somebody that, again, has been on 15 seasons, made the 6 finals. Again, same amount as Derek. Won 4 seasons. Mind you, all of them were back in the day, all 4 in a row, where, again, none of them were particularly impressive. I mean, they were all obviously old school format outside of Fresh Meat. And again, Fresh Meat was fine, but not like an overly impressive win there, to where I actually feel like Darrell's more impressive seasons are the ones that he didn't go on to win. Where, again, I think you have a season like the Ruins, where, again, he potentially could have won again and went to elimination a few times. And again, I think that was a pretty impressive showing, but obviously he gets taken out because he gets into a fight, which is dumb on him, but still, he was relatively close to winning on that season. Also had a very impressive performance on Invasion of the Champions. Again, the fact that he beats both Bananas and Zach and gets close to the final, again, I think is a very good performance there. Also, his All-Star appearances have been very strong. I mean, he almost won All-Stars 1, again, was neck and neck with Yes. All-Stars 2, he once again gets second place. To where, again, I feel like Darrell is actually competitive. For me personally, I'm actually more impressed by the later days of his career than what he was able to do when he was actually winning. And again, when in comparison to Derek, they are very, very similar. Again, even like similar style of elimination records, with Darrell having like a 9-7, which, to be fair, actually Derek's technically better. But like practically the only stat that Darrell actually is better at Derek in is, again, number of wins, which, again, is something that I don't really put much credence into, especially considering I think Derek's wins are more impressive than Darrell's, even though, again, it's barely. Again, the reason why I do have Darrell this high is because I feel like Darrell has performed better recently than Derek, where, again, I think it's really those 2 All-Star appearances of him getting second place in both of those back to back, where in both those seasons he outplaces Derek, to where, again, I think that's enough for me, to where, again, it's obviously very, very close. I think it's a pretty marginal difference, but for me, I do have Darrell here at number 9. Now number 8, and now we're moving on to somebody that I'm kind of surprised made my top 10, though when looking at his record, it is just very, very consistent until the most recent season. And that person is Mark Long. And Mark Long, again, is somebody that is, along with, again, the likes of the Theo Vons, the Mike the Miz's of the world, where, again, it is a little bit tough to gauge him, just because, again, a lot of his seasons were back in the day. Again, he has 2 wins, both of which, again, being very old school seasons, has been on 9 seasons, made the 6 finals. Again, a pretty impressive track record, where the only times he doesn't make it into the final are, again, Challenge 40, which, again, are we counting that? But also Battle of the Sexes 2, a spot where he made an agreement to let them vote him out to share the prize money afterwards, where, again, he was right before the final. So, again, still a very impressive run there. And Battle of the X's, a season where he also made a deal with Johnny Bananas to share the prize money and essentially sacrificed himself at the final elimination. I mean, if we're taking out Challenge 40, he has one of the most consistent records in the history of the show. Again, there's literally never a point he's on the show and doesn't make it to the final elimination before the final. And again, with 6 final performances, again, I think that is very, very impressive. Now, obviously, his elimination record is very spotty. He has a 3-3, but that's largely because he avoids elimination, because Mark is probably one of the best social players in the history of the show, and the fact that he is able to cultivate these relationships and is able to avoid a lot of those eliminations during the early days of the show. And to be fair, again, obviously there's a lot of like out of game ramifications to that, and the fact that he was also around for longer. So again, I think there was like reverence for him, but again, I still think it's very impressive the way he was just able to avoid elimination for most of his seasons. And again, he came back on All-Stars being the oldest competitor by a good chunk and still is able to make it to the final in both of those seasons. So again, I think Mark Long is a very, very strong competitor. The question was the order, where again, I think these last three here have been relatively close. Really, for me, the top seven are like, again, on a separate tier than these three. But again, I do think it's the fact that Mark just has such a clean record outside of Challenge 40, being, again, one of the most consistent competitors of all time, especially when, again, he's been on 9 seasons. It's not like he's only been on like 3 or 4. For me, I do feel like at the end of the day, that is enough to be better than the likes of Darrell and Derek, who, again, probably have like technically better records, but I feel like their careers are a lot more spotty. And because of that, for me, Mark's here at number 8. Now number 7, and now we're getting into the tough decisions here. Where I think the top 7 for me are like the 7 people that came to my mind when I first created this list, and obviously the top 3 are the top 3, which we'll get to, but the question was 4 through 7. A lot of these people are kind of interchangeable to me, but at number 7, we're gonna go with Wes. And Wes is a player that obviously like gets talked about as like one of the best challenge competitors of all time. Again, gets talked about alongside the likes of, again, CT, Bananas, and Jordan, who we'll talk about a bit later as like one of the best challenge competitors. Yeah, I've always personally found Wes to be a pretty overrated competitor. Now, Wes, again, does have a very like solid strategic mind, definitely one of the more savvy players to play the challenge, and again, is a very competent competitor. Obviously, we saw him win pretty recently in All-Stars 3, but I feel like his track record as a whole is just very spotty. It really is just him going in and out of having good season and bad season, like pretty much left and right, to where, again, he has a very good first performance in Fresh Meat. Mind you, again, bad politically, but again, good in terms of the fact that he wins 5 eliminations. Mind you, all those eliminations were the same, but again, still very impressive elimination record there. He also obviously makes it to the final, though loses with Casey, but that's not really a major ding there. But again, comes back for the duel, has a very impressive performance there. Again, goes on to win that season, and then takes a break. But then once he comes back again, his record is, again, very just rocky. And it's really rocky from that point forward, where, again, he's on the bottom the entire time on the Ruins and eventually taken out by Kahutta. He then goes on to dominate the early game of Fresh Meat 2, but even then, like, ends up underperforming in the competitive aspects of that season. He comes back for Rivals, where he does end up making it to the end again, alongside Kenny. Probably actually one of his better competitive seasons, especially when Kenny himself was kind of lacking. But then we see him again perform terribly in Battle of the X's, where like he instantly just goes after Bananas, despite the fact that Bananas is in power, which was really stupid. And then ends up being the first boot of Battle of the Seasons as well. And while he comes back to win Rivals 2 alongside CT, it was like, again, obvious that they were going to win because it's him and CT. Though I do think one of his better performances ends up being Battle of the X's 2, where, again, he's middling competitively on that season, but he is very good politically. I think probably his best political season in the history of the show, where he really is running the show. Most of it until Bananas and Nany are able to come back into the game, and that kind of screws him over. But again, I think a very impressive performance there. But then again, another like middling performance and Rivals 3, only then come back for Warlords 1, where again he has a very good performance there. Again, a good rebound season where he makes it to the final, though again didn't really have a chance at winning. Only to then again have a early boot in Warlords 2, where he's just playing very messily there. A very middling run in Total Madness, where again he just gets outclassed by Bananas on that season. And again, another early boot on Double Agents. And obviously he's had a decent run on the spin-offs, again winning All-Stars 3, again having a fine enough run on like USA 2, and like a middling run on World Championship. But again, his record's just all over the place. Where again, he's obviously been on a lot of seasons. I mean, the most seasons of anybody we've talked about up to this point. Again, 17 seasons, 6 finals, which is the same amount as literally all the other competitors we've just talked about, despite the fact that he's been on way more seasons and has won 3 seasons, which also is, again, the same amount as someone like a Derek and less than someone like a Darrell, though, again, obviously Darrell's wins were easier. And his elimination record has become very messed up in more recent years. Again, it's a 16-11. It's about where, again, he used to have an insane elimination record back in the day, but again, that just simply hasn't held up. And again, it's just, Wes is just a competitor here that, again, I think is definitely like amongst the best political players of all time. Mind you, he's also made some of the most idiotic political blunders of all time. But again, he is obviously very skilled in that aspect of the game. But when we're talking about like him as an actual competitor, my faith in him to actually win most given seasons, I don't really have much faith in Wes. Again, he's obviously very good, but he's not really amongst the best of the best in my mind. Again, I think his record is just way too spotty here. But again, it is still good enough to be here number 7. And now number 6. And number 6 is tough here, as this is a person that was initially higher on my list. I think I was actually a point where I had this person at number 4. But the more I thought about it, the more I ended up dropping them, even though I do think they're still a very consistent competitor. And that person is Evan. And Evan is somebody that obviously, again, had a very good record back in the day. I mean, really dominated in dailies on his original season, Fresh Meat, and had to be taken out due to medical. He then proceeds to have another very impressive run on The Duel. I believe wins a lot of dailies there. Though obviously tries to make this big move and take out CT at the end and ends up failing at that. But again, had he made it to the final, I think he's, again, a very likely winner. Beyond that, another finals appearance in Gauntlet 3, where he probably should have had his first win had it not been for the fact that Big Easy gets DQ'd. Beyond that, also ends up winning The Duel 2, where he's in this dominant alliance the entire time. Now, mind you, I think a criticism of that is that's actually probably one of his weaker seasons from like a daily perspective, where I feel like a certain person we're about to be talking about kind of outclassed him during a lot of that season, but still a very consistent record there. And again, gets his first win and then ends up winning on the Ruins in a pretty dominant performance there, even though, again, I think he had some strategic blunders along the way, particularly around his relationship with Veronica. But really, that probably should have been the end of his career, but then he decides to come back again for Rivals in a spot where he clearly just wasn't into it and seemingly just kind of gives up, where he ends up being eliminated by CT and Adam, which again is a very bad run and just one that, again, not great for his resume there. But really before that, again, his seasons from Fresh Meat to the Ruins is one of the most impressive stretches of gameplay in the history of the show. Again, it is a very consistent ride there. Again, he makes it to the final in all but one of those seasons, and even then, The Duel is probably one of his best performing seasons. Again, it's a very, very good record, alongside the fact that he, again, ends up being this very dominant force in terms of the political game, where it's obviously him and Kenny kind of running the show at that era of the show. And again, I think Evan clearly is a truly elite competitor. Though, again, the comparison between this and the next person, though, is, again, a little difficult. I really did not know which way to go, as I do think their records are relatively similar, but the other person has a slightly better elimination record and another win, to where, again, it's very, very close between the two. Yeah, and taking Rivals out of it, I do think Evan has one of the most consistent records on the board, though someone has a little bit more consistent of a record, which we'll talk about, which is why Evan's here number 6. Number 5, we're moving on to a player that I debated a lot between this person and Evan. I think this is a person that, again, has a much smaller resume, though what they do have is very, very strong. And at number 5, I do have Landon. And again, Landon is this competitor here that, again, has been on 4 seasons, made it to the final 3 times, has won 3 times. The only time he did not make it to the final and did not win was Duel 2, where he was the best daily competitor of that entire season and gets taken out in a very wonky elimination where, again, kind of the rules were a little bit unclear, where he ends up losing to Brad. But still, overall, a very impressive performance across his 4 seasons. The problem is that he only has 4 seasons. And when mixing that the fact that also like 2 of his wins are on like older format seasons, again, it does make it a little bit tough to really gauge him, which is what makes this actually, again, a bit difficult between him and Evan, because obviously I think just on paper, again, I think Landon's record is much more spotless. Again, only has lost 1 season, has a 5-1 elimination record. That one elimination was, again, a very rocky one, and has no real down points in his career, but just has such a little career. But again, I think his complete dominance of Duel 2 until he was like kind of taken out due to wonky circumstances at the very end is something to mention here, especially considering the fact that, again, I feel like Landon very likely beats Evan if they made it to the final there, which they were extremely close to doing. And beyond that, Landon once again just kind of dominates on Fresh Meat 2. Again, an insane final performance, again, carrying Harley through the final, to where, again, Landon is certainly one of the most impressive competitors of all time. I just found it tough to really assess where he should land here. But again, in the comparison between him and Evan, I do feel like his record is more spotless, and I do have more faith in Landon than Evan to win any given season. So while I do think Evan is obviously a more dominant force politically, I do feel like Landon's also a competitor that is more times than not in the majority and would, again, just stomp over everybody towards the end game stretch. So again, for me, I have him here at number 5. Now, number 4, I mean, I think it kind of should be clear, considering I think the top 3 is very obvious, and I think there's a certain competitor I haven't talked about at number 4. Though I'm surprised they are this high, but at number 4, I do have Kenny. And again, obviously, Kenny, very icky stuff that I could talk about, but in terms of just him as a competitor, his track record is pretty insane. Again, he does have 8 seasons, 7 finals, 3 wins, 5-2 elimination record. One of those, again, being a genuine loss against Nehemiah in the Duel, that being the only time he didn't make it to the final, and the other one being in the Island, which, again, do we really count those? But still, again, his track record as a whole, though, is insane. Again, he ends up making it to the finals in his first ever season, Fresh Meat, despite the fact that he was, again, kind of on the bottom at points in that season, but again, still was able to make it to the end, get second place alongside Tina, then and gets his first ever win on Inferno 3 and what is a just kind of fine season. But then once again, gets to the final again in Gauntlet 3. Again, would have won had it not been for Big Easy dying during that final. And it is by that point in the series where, again, we really see Kenny have this like political dominance over the game. Again, probably being one of the best political competitors of all time. And the fact that he was able to dominate these majority groups on every season he was in, outside of, again, certain one we'll talk about, I think is a very impressive aspect of Kenny's game. Where, again, I think Kenny is somebody that, again, is a very consistent competitor, but is certainly not amongst the biggest, like, physical specimens the show has ever seen. Again, I think literally everybody else in the top 6, at least, I would say are for sure better physical competitors than Kenny. But Kenny is also just, again, such a master at the political game, and that's a lot of the reason why he doesn't go home early. And again, he makes it to so many finals. So again, we see him make the final again in the island and proceed to win that season as well. We see him again make it to the end in Ruins and dominate that season. And then we come into Fresh Meat 2, where again, that's actually a season where he's on the bottom, and despite being on the bottom, he plays extremely well. He's able to flip the game on Wes and Evelyn, and is end up able to, again, come in second at the very end against Landon, to where, again, I think that's also a very impressive performance. So while, again, I think the argument would be that, okay, Landon outperformed Kenny, so why isn't Landon higher? But I do feel like, again, Kenny's track record is just so much more impressive with him having way more seasons under his belt, and again, only not being in the final in one of those seasons. As we, again, see his final season in Rivals, and he once again makes the final. Mind you, I will say, again, his actual performance on that season was, again, very lacking, where really until the final, I did feel like he was kind of being dragged through the game by Wes, but again, still a very impressive performance as a whole, to where, again, it's just a very clean record, to where I don't have that much faith in Kenny to win that many seasons. He still actually did win 3 seasons and almost won a 4th with the Big Easy situation, to where, like, I do think Kenny is someone that is, again, a very solid, consistent competitor, one of the best political players of all time, and that's why he's here number 4. Now, number 3. And in the top 3 here, again, very obvious. And it's funny that after Challenge 40, my top 3 here are literally the inverse of what my top 3 was previously. And at number 3, I do have CT. And again, CT was my number 1 coming into Challenge 40. And to be fair, it's not like Challenge 40 necessarily did much for CT's legacy in itself, where, well, it was, again, a very lacking season. It's not something I necessarily dock too much from him. I think it's more so the fact that the other 2 went up more so than CT went down. Where, again, CT obviously one of the biggest physical specimens in the history of the show. Again, this massive brooding force that has, again, the ability to obviously dominate seasons. Again, we see him early on in his career. While he doesn't get a win for a while, again, he is one of the most intimidating figures in the show. Mind you, obviously, there's also some very icky stuff in that. And again, him getting DQ'd due to violence multiple times. But again, the fact that he, again, makes finals even in that period of the game. Again, probably almost wins the duel. Again, he's one challenge away from winning that. Only gets DQ'd because of, again, the technicality of you can't rip the flag, which is so stupid. But once he actually comes back properly for Rivals, again, he has a very impressive record from that point on, where, again, he almost makes the finals on Rivals. After facing off against a lot of adversity there, he proceeds to, again, almost win Battle of the X's, again, gets second place in that season, and then he finally actually gets his first win in Rivals 2, which is just, again, a completely dominant performance. Again, does extremely well in challenges, does extremely well politically. Again, a very strong run there. Comes back for Free Agents, where, again, he also has a very strong run. Again, gets very close to the final, and essentially an elimination against Bananas away from going on to win that season, probably. And it doesn't have another true season until Invasion, but again, at Invasion, he then goes on to win again. Mind you, Invasion's, again, a little bit of a wonky format. But still, again, he beats Darrell, not so fast, and ends up pretty handily winning the final there. And after that, again, his record definitely gets a little bit more rocky. And then, again, he has then a final performance at 30-30, and to he goes on a little bit of a slump after that. I mean, while he does have, again, a very good performance in War of the Worlds 2, he, again, is an early boot on, again, Final Reckoning, and War of the Worlds, and Total Madness, which is, again, something to definitely note here. But again, but then has, like, again, an insane 2-season stretch in Double H and Spies, Lies, and Allies, where he ends up winning both of those seasons. Again, Spies, Lies, and Allies being one that, again, is a fairly impressive win, where he's pretty safe the entire time. Again, I think after Spies, Lies, and Allies, I was completely sold on the fact that CT was the best competitor of all time, but I do feel like, again, he took a break after that, came back for 40 and had a lacking performance, but in that time, I feel like the top 2 have had, again, very impressive runs that have kind of changed me on that, to where, again, I came into the process of making this video fully expecting CT to still be the top competitor on this list, but I think by the end of the day, again, he has a very good record, again, has won 5 seasons, made to 10 finals, but I just feel like the top 2, again, are people that I probably have just more faith in most given seasons. So, again, as good as CT is, I do feel like at the end of the day, I do have to leave him here at number 3. Now, number 2, we're moving on to a player that, again, I thought this person would be number 3, even after the shakeup of who's number 1, but the more I thought about it, the more I do truly think that I have to put this person at number 2, despite them being very inconsistent at points. and that person is Johnny Bananas. And again, Johnny Bananas versus CT, it was very, very close. I think for me, again, there was a while where I would have said CT is better, and I still think, again, CT has the potential to rebound a bit. But again, I think Bananas, seeing how Bananas is performing in recent seasons, I do think I have to elevate him here. Again, Bananas is someone that, again, as much as I don't like the guy, you have to give him a lot of credit for how he's actually been able to perform on the show. I mean, while, again, he's done 24 seasons, which is a lot, he has made it to the final in half of those, which, again, might not seem impressive on paper, but again, that is actually very good. And the fact that he's made it to literally the end portion of the season, the fact that he's made it to, again, the final of the season on half of his appearances, he's won 7 times. He's won over half of the finals that he's been in. That is also insane. To where, again, as much as I don't like Bananas, that is, again, an unprecedented track record that, again, it would be very difficult to beat. Now, again, the qualms can be had with his elimination record, which is only 16-15. Actually got a bit better in recent seasons, where, again, it was actually more losses than wins until more recently. But again, I think the prime of Bananas' career is, again, some of the best challenge play in the history of the show. He does have, again, a rockier start, again, a couple early boots in seasons 13 and 15, again, a kind of quiet final performance in 14, again, wins the island and the ruins, and not in a particularly impressive way where he's just kind of a lackey for Kenny during those seasons, and again, has the Bananas backpack moment in Cutthroat, though I think the point where his career really skyrockets to me is in Rivals, where, again, that's the season where, again, he ends up dominating the final alongside Tyler. He ends up beating CT in elimination. Mind you, again, there's some wonky stuff going on there, but again, still ends up beating CT and Adam. Again, very impressive win there, and proceeds to win again the following season, and goes on to win again in Battle of the X's in another very dominant performance. Goes on to then be in the final once again alongside Frank in Rivals 2, and then win again in Free Agents in what is probably his most impressive win. Again, a win where he's on the bottom for most of the season, and is able to win, I believe, 4 eliminations along the way, including, again, ones against some pretty big hitters like Jordan and CT. Ends up really just like dominating the final itself. Though, again, very impressive performance on Free Agents. I think the peak of his career. And then, again, has some like deep runs, but again, kind of lacking performances in 26-27. But then goes on to win Rivals 3. In a spot where, again, him and Sarah just dominate. Mind you, again, there wasn't much competition, but still very impressive performance there. And then he gets into, again, a little bit of a slump. I mean, again, some middling performances on Dirty 30 and Vendettas. He almost makes it to the end in Final Reckoning, though, again, not an overly impressive performance there either. Obviously, early boot in both World of Worlds 1 and 2. But then finally gets his rebound season in Total Madness, again, wins there again, and then takes a break from the show. And again, if that were the end of his career, I think I actually would have CT higher. But the reason I've elevated Bananas a bit is because I actually feel like Bananas, when he eventually came back, has been very solid. I mean, despite the fact that, again, he's in his 40s now, and like, at least in the more recent seasons, has been competing against people much younger than him, he's still able to perform very admirably. And he makes the finals of Ride or Dies in USA 2, and USA 2 being a spot where, again, he came in with no numbers, and again, still made all the way to the end. I'll say a bit rocky on World Championship. Again, not a great season there, but again, makes the final again on Challenge 40, despite facing a lot of adversity. Again, being on the bottom for a lot of the season. Again, I think that is something that's very impressive about Bananas. The fact that, again, he's performed very well since his return, again, still consistently making it to finals. Actually, probably being more consistent now than what he was right before his hiatus. So where, again, I think Bananas has had a very good run in recent years that, again, just kind of re-elevates him above CT for me, where, again, just his record outside of that is stronger than CT's. Again, he has a better elimination record now, where CT is 6-6, Bananas has 16-15. Also, again, has been to the final more seasons, has won more seasons, has a slightly better win percentage in finals than CT as well. Where, again, I think it is still close between Bananas and CT, though I think Bananas in more recent seasons kind of edged out CT to me slightly, which is enough to put him here at number 2. Now, number 1, a new number 1, someone that I was shocked and it being good enough to be at number 1, as, again, this is someone that was the definitive number 3 for me for a while. Yeah, I feel like we're at the point now where I've got to admit, at number 1, we do have Jordan. And again, I don't like Jordan. I think he's just kind of a dick. But if we're talking about his challenge career, it is very impressive. Again, he's been on 10 seasons, 7 finals, 5 wins. Again, has won half of the seasons that he has been on in a spot where, again, he's been on 10 seasons. Again, it's not like he's only been on a couple. He's been on a pretty large number of them and has won half of them. Also, elimination record is 12-6. Again, much better than the likes of CT and Bananas. But again, if you were to tell me in recent years Jordan would be good enough to be the GOAT, I would not have agreed. I would have said, again, he definitely has the potential, to be fair. Again, I think he's someone that obviously is, again, seemingly very good at a lot of these challenges. Someone that is so primed for a final, but also someone that is just, again, such an asshole. And again, someone that people actively don't like. And I think that gets him into trouble at points. But again, recently, he's kind of cleaned that up a bit. Again, not perfect, but again, definitely better in that. And also, he just had 2 wins on 2 of the most stacked fields in the history of the show. Again, one World Championship against some pretty massive names there, and then proceed to go on to win Challenge 40 in a extremely dominant performance. Again, the fact that he just blows everyone away in that final is insane. And considering the fact that he never went to elimination, and again, was pretty well insulated on that season. Again, I think very, very good play in recent years. And again, when looking at his record before that, again, it is good. I mean, again, I think Bananas had better stretches than Jordan, and CT, again, definitely you could argue as well. But again, Jordan started off his career, again, fine, a final performance in Rivals 2. He, again, has a middling performance in Free Agents where he like throws himself in and gets himself eliminated against Bananas, but and goes on to win Battle of the X's 2, and what is a pretty good performance there, pretty solid. I would say, again, I think Sarah probably did a lot more of the leading there, especially in terms of political game, but still, I think very good performance there. Goes on to win Dirty 30 in a spot where, again, I think politically questionable, but obviously just, again, pretty dominant force on that season, and then comes back for World of Worlds 2, where he once again has a pretty bad political game, but then goes on to win because of how much of a dominant force he is. And he obviously ends up having a pretty lacking performance on like Total Madness and like All-Stars 3 and even like Ride or Dies while he makes the final. It wasn't like an overly impressive run there, but yeah, I think it is really his last 2 appearances. Again, World Championship and Challenge 40. Again, 2 really dominant wins on those seasons is what really ends up elevating him on this list. Again, before that, again, I think he would have been good enough to probably be number 3. Even then, I would maybe even argue it a little bit. But I think at this point, with the 2 most recent wins, 2 very impressive wins, and with his record just being outright better than the likes of Bananas and CT, again, in terms of, again, final percentage, in terms of win percentage, in terms of elimination record. Again, just like Jordan has really just stepped above them in almost every single way, which is why he's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 male challenge competitor video. Obviously, I will be doing a female version of this list in the near future, so stay tuned for that. And also, I'll be doing a review of All-Stars Rivals, so again, stay tuned for that as well. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.